this topic today. So the panelists that we have come from, I would say, different angles, different parts of the IT world. And the topic of information is going to be interesting today because information means different things to different people. And so I'm excited about today's session. And the three panelists that we have are as good as they come, and I'll let them introduce themselves when we get to that part. But for those that are new to this, the way this works is you will get to text your questions in that you're interested in having the panelists discuss and share their experiences with you. The chat function is, if you want to use that, go ahead. It's for people, if you want to interchange, share information, you can make some contacts, but we won't be using the questions from the chat function for the actual session. The way that you'll get your questions answered is by going to the top left. You can see on the screen there, and that's the Slido tool that we use. You text your question in, or if you don't want to text any questions in, that's fine as well. You can just check on the boxes of the ones that you're most interested in hearing about. And I would highly recommend that you do that if you've got a burning desire for the panelists to talk about a given topic, because we always have a lot more questions that we can get through. So it's the most popular ones that do come to the top. So let's move on, please, Rachel. So Think IT is a service of York Solutions. It doesn't cost anything to be a member of Think IT. Only the members can get on because it is vendor free. This is wholly owned by York, and it's our service to the community. But it's not free. The not free part is, I mean, Joe Topinka is a prime example, and we get to Joe. I couldn't be happier that Joe has returned to being on the panel. He's been involved since basically day one of Think IT, before he defected out there to the East Coast or South Coast, or whichever damn coast it is on the other side of the world there. And we stayed in touch, and Joe's been on many of these sessions as an observer, and I asked him to join today. He's got a wealth of background, and Joel will tell his story with where he's from and his involvement with what we're doing now. But the mission is to truly foster professional growth and development through the power of networking and collaboration. And since day one with Joe being involved, there's so many good things happen through Think IT. And a lot of it is because of our board of advisors that advise us on a regular basis. We meet quarterly to come up with new programs. We'll get to the amazing leadership program in a second. But it truly is a wonderful community of IT leaders that are willing to help each other succeed in whatever that means to any given individual. And there's many programs involved. I'm going to whiz through this quickly because it can take a long time. Our Link to Leadership program continues to get stronger and stronger, and that program is designed for people that are just got into the leadership careers or want to go into leadership and they're in a highly technical role, and it helps accelerate the leadership track. Okay, let's move on. The Barriers Entry program, couldn't be proud of this program. And again, you can see the involvement of the community with this program. This program really is a life-changing program for people that have either taken time off work to raise families or taking time off for different reasons. It's also for the military community. We have a lot of veterans in this program, and we retool people, if you will, and get them back into the workforce through different avenues of IT, from technical to non-technical, and even some on the non-IT side of business. So this truly is a wonderful program. If you'd like to know more about that, you can see Sylvia Hinton, who runs that program. Sylvia's email address is there. Please contact Sylvia and learn more about it. Okay, let's move on. Our golf event right now, we're still going forwards with it. You can see it's September 14th. Everything that we do within Think IT that raises a penny goes back to Genesis Works. And if you don't know Genesis Works, then you need to know about Genesis Works and need to come out of your cave and learn about them, because this is truly a life-changing organization. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it because the vast majority of the people on the phone know about it, and it's a wonderful organization. So please do get involved with that. And if you can get involved in the golf event, please do as well. It's a really, really fun event. Okay, let's move on, Rachel. So this is a part of Think IT that we've started making people aware of. We're often asked by our clients to pair them up with one or two other companies here locally on a very given specific challenge that they have or an initiative that they've got. Some examples there: resourcing models, agile transformation, master data, and it goes on. And we will do that. We get a lot of satisfaction out of connecting our clients that are willing to collaborate to help others on their journey. Some companies are a lot further ahead with their agile transformation. Some are just getting going with it. Some think they're doing it and want to know if they're really conducting best practices or not. So don't hesitate to contact me if you'd like me to help facilitate some sessions like that. Okay, move on. not much longer with me talking. Amazing leadership program. Joe, you'll be proud of us. I know you've been watching this thing kind of develop, but we've actually got our kickoff session for this program on Monday. And I'm very excited about this program, probably more so than anything else that we've done within Think IT, because this has been discussed for years now, and Andy's been a big part of helping with this, and is in our board of advisors. And it's truly going to be a game changer for those very senior level IT leaders that want to truly, have their career explode, whatever that means to them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to become a CIO somewhere. There's other ways for people to continue to grow and prosper. So you can see down the right side the different people that we have involved that are going to help shape this program. Our pilot program kicks off on Monday. We're going to be running a pilot like we did with Link to Leadership to make sure we put together the absolute best program possible. And you can see the speakers that we have on the left there are very high-powered, very, very well-respected senior executives that are going to help shape this program to be the best of its kind wherever you are in the world. This will truly be a wonderful program. So if you're a senior level leader, and titles are all relative, but it really is a director and up type of program, then feel free to contact us and sign up. There is a registration, there is an application process that we'll be going through. But we are kicking off the first session on a virtual basis on Monday. The first couple of sessions will likely be virtual. The whole thing could be virtual. I mean, this is a new world that we're in. So we thought, well, why not start this thing virtually? There's no replacement for in-person. We all agree with that. But we've also learned that you can achieve a lot virtually. So we're going to kick it off on Monday. Okay, let's move on. All right, here we go. Game on. A deeper look at information in the mysterious world of information technology. Now, a really good friend of mine sent me a text saying, who the hell comes up with this stuff? Well, I'm afraid this one was me. And let me tell you why. Bear with me a second. Information is king. I read that somewhere once and I can't remember what it is. Information is king. And there are very, very different ways to look at information. And there are very different things you can do with it. And I'll look at this from a positive standpoint rather than a negative. The positive standpoint is for the people that I've learned and observed that are the most successful. They know how to get the information. They know how to distribute the information to the right people at the right time in the right way. And conversely, for the people that don't get that, or either it's the wrong time, or it's the wrong person, or it's in the wrong way, there are not usually very positive outcomes. So, when I looked through the big long list of people that I could contact and asked to be on this panel, the people that I talked with come from different angles of information. So I think today's session will be really interesting to get the perspective of our esteemed panelists as it relates to that one word, information. So let's move on. So that's my preface to this, and here are our esteemed panelists. And I would say that even though Andy's pretty good right now, I still think Joe's got the best beard. So we'll give you a silver medal, and you can't really tell with me. And my daughter said, "Are you growing a beard, Dad?" I said, "No, I'm just not shaving." So there's a slight difference, subtle difference. So let's have our panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with Joe, and I'll look as they show on my screen, Joe, Julie, and Andy. So Joe, if you'd like to start, please.
Sure. Good morning, and thank you for having me on, Richard. I spent about 10 years in Minneapolis. I grew up in the Midwest. I've been in IT over 40 years now. Just turned 65 in January, and I still can't get enough of this business. It's a lot of fun. I'm spending a fair amount of time. I moved to the Charlotte, North Carolina region. I don't know if you guys know this, but the weather's a little warmer here. I'm an author. I've got a second book in the works. I've started a podcast, so I'm just having fun. Spending time with a number of not-for-profits in the Charlotte region. Taking my cue from what Richard's done with Think IT, my inspiration came from Richard. So doing some good work here in the Charlotte region. And I'm also board chair of the Business Relationship Management Institute, which is some 30,000 members worldwide focusing on that as a discipline. So I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you very much, Joe. Julie.
Morning, everybody. I'm Julie Durham, based here in Minneapolis. I actually live in Chanhassen. So I'm originally from southern Wisconsin, but I went to school in upstate New York, went to RPI. After that, moved to the DC area and worked for ExxonMobil for a while, doing a bunch of global implementations with them. After Exxon moved to SAP and moved to New York City, I could live anywhere I wanted with SAP and chose New York. So I had a phenomenal time with SAP, focusing principally on the retail industry. Monday mornings I'd get on a plane, Thursday nights I'd come back to New York, which was fabulous for that season of my life, so to speak. And then I got a really unique opportunity to go work for a privately held conglomerate based in Dubai, and left SAP and moved to Dubai as the chief architect for the Alpha Tame Group. Spent a year there, eventually took on the interim CIO role. And decided I wanted to come back to the US. And when I did that, one of my clients that I had worked with SAP asked if I'd be interested in joining. And that's how I ended up back in Minneapolis. I joined Best Buy in 2011 and joined as originally leading and creating a team called Technology and Analytics. So really focusing on our kind of inner platforms for the company, things to drive personalization, marketing, and help drive our digital agenda. And the last year I was at Best Buy, I took a different role where I moved into more of a business CIO role and led all of Geek Squad and services for Best Buy. And about 3 years ago, I was trying to decide what I wanted to do next, had a really phenomenal experience within retail, but really started to take some interest in United Health Group and Optum and joined Optum. So I joined Optum in 2016 as the VP of Software Engineering, leading our payment integrity capabilities. So if you think of payment integrity, think of looking across all of healthcare for all the fraud, waste, and error that occurs. And I'm sure you can imagine there's a lot, right? Not all of that is malicious intent bad guys. That certainly is there and something that the team focuses on. But in a lot of cases, it's wrong. And this year, I think our teams will take a little over $20 billion of cost out of healthcare of just finding inaccuracies in claims, payments, and insurance. About a year ago, I got the opportunity to create another team at Optum, which was our AI platform team. So we didn't really have a strong default workload place to do some of our AI and ML workload, which I'm sure we're all chasing and looking at across this call. So created a small team to stand up our first fully automated public cloud environment for AI and ML for the company, and then built out a transformation team to also help some of our teams that are just starting to get their feet going, so to speak, on modernization and AI. And this year I got another extended scope, which was our Optum Connect business. So the way to think of Optum Connect is principally what we do is we offer IT outsourcing to both payers and providers. So in a lot of cases when Optum is engaging across the health platform and we're selling our Optum products, we'll see that there's also an opportunity for us to come in, bring best practices and take over IT for payers and providers. So I'm currently the SVP and CTO of software engineering. Have about 20 years of experience within IT and have learned a lot from this community. So looking forward to hopefully trying to give back a little bit today. That's me.
And Julie is a very much a regular on our panel, so we appreciate you being back. Thanks, Julie. Mr. Bingenheimer with the silver medal beard.
Good morning. This is Andy Bingenheimer. I have to mention that Mr. Topinka forgot one hole in his resume, which is he's the CIO whisperer. So I think just happy to have Joe back. If there's any upside to the fact that we can't all get together in person, having Joe back with us is a real treat. So Joe, happy to see you again. Like Julie, I grew up in Wisconsin, so go Badgers, and worked for GMAC, Ally Bank for 20 years in various roles, mostly in the risk management space, supporting technology and building technology to support sort of the evolving risk management space across financial services. For the last 5 years, I've been with US Bank. I started running financial crimes technology, so think AML, fraud, economic sanctions. So clearly a very, this topic this morning is very relevant to the work we do in the financial crime space. And most recently took on a larger role supporting corporate technology across the bank. So finance, risk, financial crimes, HR, and I'm also responsible for the bank's core banking platforms, a lot of the mainframe systems across the bank. So looking forward to discussing. And by the way, I was the person that texted Richard about the topic, and there's a couple more expletives in my text. He
Yeah, I did. You never know. It's been recorded, and you never know who's going to. I'd hate for it to get sent to my HR department, so that was a PG-rated response. All right, let's get cracking then. So we're going to, as we usually do, have each of the panelists the opportunity to start and finish, and I'll kind of juggle a little bit. But we'll start with the. Let me move my thing here. We'll start with the way the panelists introduce themselves. So we'll start with you, Joe. And I know you panelists can actually see the questions as well. And for those of you in the audience now, again, if you go to slide, or it's on the left side of your screen there, if you haven't yet, and check the boxes of the questions that you would like to have answered, and they'll pop up to the top. It looks like a lot of people have not done that yet, but we'll start with what's at the top now, and we'll start with you, Joe. Then, IT orgs have spent lots of money on data warehouse solutions. What trends do you see on that traditional investment? So let's start with you then, Joe.
Yeah, and I have, as a CIO, I've spent millions of dollars building data warehouses, and invariably it seems like you disappoint the user communities, the C-suite. They're always hungry for more. What I've seen, and most recently I had some experience in my last CIO role, where there's been, the convergence of cloud across every single business suite. I had an opportunity to leverage a cloud-based data warehouse platform called Snowflake, integrated that into our Power BI environment, had a lot of fun with that, and we were able to deliver a lot of information very quickly that we weren't able to deliver in the past. So I think that's one of the big things that's changed. I think one thing that hasn't changed is, for data to be useful and to really leverage it, you need to have people who are curious about it. And oftentimes, I've worked with C-suite execs who want more, but they don't know how to ask the right questions. So my experience has been I think there's still plenty of frustration and a lot more money to spend on this solution, but I do see evolution happening with the cloud platforms, like I mentioned. And I think, I think it takes some innovation and people who are willing to do some experimentation. That's difficult to do sometimes when you have C-suite executives that are, trying to curb IT spending. Sometimes if you find a willing business participant who's really curious, has a bias towards data and analytics, and are more curious about, what kind of correlations can they make with the data. If you partner with them, you can get some pretty interesting results. So I think it's an ongoing evolution. I think technology is advancing, and there are some new solutions that are out in the marketplace. There's a really cool company, an innovative company here in Charlotte called Stratified, that has taken, the traditional, machine learning data, artificial intelligence capabilities and data analytics capabilities, and turn that sort of data science skill set into a platform that, mere mortals can use. And I've been watching them evolve. So I think there are going to be more and more of those types of solutions, Richard.
So Joe, let me ask you a follow-up question. You said something that piqued my interest, because I think this is pretty common across the board for business executives that can hardly spell IT. Now, I would fall into the second category. It wouldn't fall into the first, but I can hardly spell IT. When you say that when they don't know what questions to ask, how do you deal with that? When you know that there's questions they should ask, but they don't know which questions they should ask, how do you deal with that?
I think one of the things that I've done, throughout my career is I typically start with and the customer. And oftentimes there's really interesting data associated with customers, whether it's, kind of early warning signs on attrition if they're buying in categories, if you're selling hardware, say products like in my past life. If you can start to show them that there's a lot more to the data than just, yesterday's, financial results, that there may be some trends in there. If you start to show them that, you take a drink of that water and it tastes pretty good, you can kind of get them to come along for the ride. But it's not easy, Richard, especially when, especially now when costs are, kind of in the spotlight and people are less willing to spend money on non-discretionary sorts of items. But it's a difficult path, but I always start with customers, because there's usually a C-suite exec that'll pay attention to if you've got information about customers that they've never heard or seen before.
And not easy is, I think, the operative term in there. And those are the kind of issues and situations that we're going to be addressing in the executive leadership program that we're going to be conducting here, because I think that's key to what Joe just said there. There's a lot of unknowns, and at that point you're selling to stakeholders and the purse string holders with why they should spend money. And as we all know, that's much easier said than done. Okay, let's move on. Andy.
Yeah, I think the fatigue around spending millions of dollars on data warehouses is only surpassed by the fatigue around writing off those investments. And I think the thing that I would say is shifting a little bit is we all, and many of us, working through sort of the shift in how we deliver technology and how we partner with our business partners, whether it's your agile journey or your product model journey. I think the biggest thing I see shifting is really a question that comes around revenue. And it's one thing to talk about and sell new technologies and data projects and talk about how much more insights we're going to be able to glean. And insights are great, and there's no question the C-suite has an insatiable desire to be omnipotent, but not at any cost. And so I think as Joe said, just the ability to tie to a business partner, not only one that understands the value that can be achieved by making these types of investments, but willing to put their money where their mouth is. When you can bring an investment to your investment committee, with a strong revenue case behind it, and not just a build it and they will come sort of story, it's a much stronger and more powerful way to move the ball forward. And I think the technology is certainly evolving, and certainly the capabilities that we have to deliver functionality and deliver information more effectively is there. But also the speed of data is also making that more challenging. When you look at just banking and financial services, the pace of real-time payments, money moves instantly. And so the demand and the bar in terms of how quickly information is changing and how quickly business leaders need to react to that information just makes the challenge that much more difficult.
Andy, there was a word in there that you used, and I have no idea what the hell it means. It must be an American word. What's that word again? Omnipotent or something? What was that word?
All-knowing.
Yeah. Could you text the spelling to me, please? I got to look that up and fact check that. I'm going to check with my buddy Zuckerberg to see if he agrees or not. Okay. Well, we'll move on to Julie. Julie, your turn.
Yeah, I like one of the things I think you had mentioned was there's a lot of fatigue around data projects, right? If everybody saw we're going to do EDWs, and then it was a data lake, and now here comes streaming, et cetera. So I think be cautious about trying to solve all these problems with the latest buzzword, right? I think, Richard, when you talked about information, I didn't instantly think it was about a good, like data management strategy. But I think culturally, one of the things we all have to think about before we just rush in to put a new technology brand or logo on top of this is why. So your job as an engineer is not to do what you're told, but to understand why you were told to do it. And in a lot of cases, I think if you appropriately push on the why they're asking for that information, you can find that it might exist somewhere else. There might be a different solution versus just trying to put everything into a lake or a real-time analytics. So I think one of the things we haven't been great at as a technology team is really understanding the why, the business reason why we're told to do something, and then creating a solution to that. All too many of us will jump in and be like, yep, once we have this up, everything will be fine. But I don't think it really solves the core problem of being a good partner to figure out why they're asking that information versus just continuously feeding that appetite for data. I think we did a quick assessment where we thought we had around 5,000 reports in one area and we had 30,000, right? So it's not a lack of us giving information. It's probably just consistently trying to answer questions and not knowing why we were trying to answer them. So I think another shift that everyone should really be thinking about here is, for a long time, we separated the app dev team and the data teams, right? We didn't put those two things together. And as now we've created, the desire for a full stack engineer or a full stack Scrum team, data has to come along with that, right? So I think there's a lot of movement around data ops teams, where your data scientists and your software engineers and your data acquisitions teams all work closer together, so that we understand like the full product and how to solve that problem. So.
Julie, very well said, and I want to, if you don't mind, expand on the why, because I think that's an incredibly, maybe the most important word in our vocabulary. If people truly know why they're doing something, they're much more likely to be successful. And what I found is you go further down the hierarchy in the technical stack, the people that are doing the very hands-on work often don't know why. And why is that? In my opinion, it's because the leadership has not really discussed the why with them. And way too many people truly don't understand how their role fits into the big picture. And when people truly understand that, there's a much more meaningful, purposeful aspect of their role when they truly understand how it fits into the big picture. So I can't stress that enough with all the leaders, is for people on your teams to understand why they're doing what they're doing. So thank you for that, Julie. Let's stick with you, Julie, then we'll go backwards this time. We'll start with you on this top question, the next one then. And this question always comes up, and it's always interesting to get people's feedback on this one. Curious to hear your thoughts on the differences between CIO and CTO, and why we've seen an increase in the separation of those roles recently. And I think that is a fact based on what we've seen. There are numerous CTOs popping up, and in some companies, there are both the CIO and the CTO. In most companies, the CTO report to the CIO. That's not always the case. Sometimes the CIO reports to the CTO. So this is an interesting question. So let's start with you, Julie, on this one.
Yeah, I think, this one's tough. I would say even at Optum, we're going to use those words very interchangeably, right? Like no one's going to have a perfect definition of when to cut a CTO rec versus a CIO rec. I would think that, for me, a lot of where I think the CTO title will come in is if the product that you're actually selling is technology, and you tend to have more software engineers, meaning you have to build the thing that consumers are actually using. I think that's when we'll lean more towards a CTO title, but not to say that CIOs aren't required to still have software engineering chops and skills. I would look even at my scope, for the 3 areas I have. For payment integrity, we use CTO because we're actually building commercial software. For the AI platforms, we use CTO because the platform is the product. But when I look at Optum Connect, which is IT services, I actually use CIO for that title because I think it fits a more traditional, encompassing all things, including back office technology, service management, operations in the CIO. So I don't think it'll ever be a perfectly clear line between those two. I don't think just because you're a CIO doesn't mean you don't understand software engineering, and just because you're a CTO means you only do software engineering. You obviously have to understand the full end-to-end spectrum of delivering technology. So I wish I had a better answer for you. I think it's going to be, it depends for a while. I try not to spend too much time over the I versus the T. A lot of how I kind of think about my role is, whether you call me the CIO or CTO, is I have full accountability for what I'm doing. I'm the full accountable technologist for that area, whether you use CI or CT on it. So I wish I had a better, clear answer. I was hoping one of my panelists could maybe clear that up. But I think that's basically where we kind of use it, is if it's going to be focused more on actual creating commercial software, we're going to use the T component versus the I, which kind of is probably a broader title. So
I don't think there is necessarily a clear defined answer, Julie, in my opinion. I think what you said about if your title starts with a C, you have full accountability, regardless of whether it's an I or a T. Okay, Andy.
Yeah, maybe I'll throw a little more confusion in the mix rather than clarity.
Go ahead. Yeah.
With another letter, which is the D. And so the advent of the Chief Digital Officer and what we're seeing around the industry around the notion of not only the title and the individual, but entire organizations springing up within companies around digital transformation. And maybe I'll use my answer to that question to probably shed a little bit of light on the CIO versus the CTO. And I think at some level it ties to kind of where the company is in terms of change management and life cycle. When you look at in U.S. Bank, we hired a chief digital officer about a year and a half ago, and the thought process was around really driving the focus on digital transformation. And so you might ask, well, where does the CDO job, leave off, and where does the CIO pick up? And the reality is, they're partners that are accountable for driving change within the organization. I think long term, I think the CDO, I shouldn't say this in a public setting, given we have one, but I think the CDO job probably, goes away at some point. I think it surges back. And I think it's the same thing that we've seen with the CIO and the CTO, where, a lot of organizations, they'll have two and then they'll merge into one. And depending on what's happening and the amount of change the company's going through, it maybe splits off into two again. So I think it's probably more tied to the company and the amount of change that's occurring and where that company is in the life cycle of their evolution that really drives sort of these decisions around, how many CIOs, CTOs, and CDOs, you might think is appropriate.
And to shed a little bit more confusion into it as well, often the CDO, but more often than not, doesn't technically report into IT. They're sort of as the business, whatever the hell that means these days. So that causes even more confusion. Okay, let's move on to Joe.
I think my take is, I think, chief digital, chief data officer, I think those positions, I mean, my hypothesis on those is that's a direct reaction or correlation to frustration in the C-suite. They're not getting what they want, and so they invent new roles to try to solve the problem. But for me, CTO, where I've seen it really work well, and I think Julie, you were touching on this. This is I worked for a product company where we actually built firmware into IoT-based products. This is a SnapAV, the firm I left here earlier this year when I retired. And they make, amplifiers, receivers, network gear, surveillance equipment. And there's a CTO that has a reference architecture for all of that firmware. It's a little bit different than the traditional CIO role. You're more focused on, say, business applications, not to say you can't wear both hats. But in that organization, that CTO role was more on the product side and really centered around those sorts of things. So good collaboration between the two roles when I was there. And we both reported to the C-suite, so it was really not a big deal. And we did a lot of overlapping. I owned the cybersecurity team, so we made sure that cybersecurity principles and rules and policies were followed across the lines. But I think, in a product company, it makes more sense. I think I've seen some organizations implement sort of an interchangeable role where, they're just a traditional company where they're not really building software per se, and that's where it gets a little confusing to me. But I think that product company mindset is where I think I see CTOs really having a lot more success and a lot more clarity in the companies that I've experienced.
So all that being said, I think to Julie's point, there is no clear answer to this question, and different companies are handling this differently, and companies have CIOs and some have just CTOs and some have both. So I don't think there is any real uniformity to the the hierarchy of the C-suite, especially as it relates to IT. So I don't think there is one. It's a big gray area. Okay, we'll move on. We'll start with you, Andy, on this next one. Then we'll give you a chance to start first, offer your opinion on this one. And this is a question that's been asked many times over the years and our different Think IT events. How have IT skills and roles evolved as information has taken on such an important role in business? Well, let's start with taken on such an important role in business, because that almost implies that it wasn't as important before. So how would you respond to that, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the importance of technology as true business partners, and again, we've been saying that forever, but I think we're starting to put our money where our mouth is. When you look at the evolution of the product model, and I think that the thing that's changing is that forever it's from the first Think IT meeting that I joined, the discussion around, how does IT get a seat at the table, was ever present. And, it's really, I think, our business partners, particularly driven by, the shift to, or the expanded focus on digital, have really been now, bringing it the other way, where they're saying, how do I get IT at my table? They're recognizing that, finally kind of getting the message that, they've got to, have embedded reporters within the technology organization to drive and ensure that they're getting the capabilities that they need. And part of that, Joe's comment around frustration at the top of the house, is maybe driving a bit of that, in that, I don't think business leaders are getting away anymore with saying, yeah, I missed my numbers because, technology didn't deliver. If technology doesn't deliver, it's, business is held just as accountable. So it's really driving, improvement in that partnership, when it's like, we're Thelma and Louise driving over the cliff together if we're going over the cliff, versus, technology just sort of kind of taking the hit. And so what that drives in terms of how, technology roles have evolved is, we now have to put our money where our mouth is, to take accountability, to understand the business, understand how the business makes money, understand how the products that we're building drive efficiency, drive revenue gain. And so, I think that's probably, the one of the bigger shifts that I'm seeing is, and I love it when I see someone on my team passionately arguing, why we're doing a project, or the revenue that we're going to gain on a project. That's almost as exciting as it is around, exploring or identifying some great technology breakthrough. So I think that's probably the biggest change I'm seeing, is the real kind of melding of the business and technology partnership.
And I go back to the old Tom Hanks movie, Big. I think probably everybody on this call watched that movie. But there's a scene in there where the CEO asks Tom Hanks what he does at the company, and he says data processing. And he just laughed, as if to say, well, that's on the lowest part of the totem pole as far as value in the company. And if you looked, I mean, that's kind of how it was back then. IT was in the basement doing data processing. Nobody knew what the hell why they were doing what they're doing. It's back to Julie's why. And I think I shouldn't offer my opinion. I'm not a panelist, but I think it has. I think the question is a very good one, because I've seen a massive change in nearly 30 years in this business, with the relevance of IT and the relevance of the roles, which is why I'm going to put another plug in for our executive level leadership training program, which is why that's so important. Because to Andy's point there, that the line there, that the invisible line of IT in the business, is IT part of the business? Is it separate to the business? The answer is yes. The line is thinner than ever, and I think it's a bi-directional relationship where IT truly has to understand the why. And Andy mentioned something there that's extremely important: revenue and money. And we all have to remember what businesses are all about, why they exist in the first place. They're to make money. And if people don't understand the role that they're playing as it relates to that, then I would suggest you change your thinking, and you try and understand, or not try, you do understand how your role plays into the company making money. Okay, off my soapbox. Julie, time for you to get on yours.
Perfect. No, Agni, I just want to build on that too. I think that the most encouraging thing I've seen in the last 5 years is not only having the engineers or the data team being able to get that data, but when they're the ones explaining it, right? It used to be, here, I'll go fetch this, we'll give it to a business person, they'll explain it. Their ability to describe what the data is telling them is huge, right? And I think that goes back into the why, right? Own that story, own that message, deliver it. We actually know probably more about the data, what it's telling us, than we usually stand up and speak up about. Richard, to your point, I think we treated anyone who worked in data as a third-class citizen, right? It was maybe, software engineers, analytics people, and then the data engineers. And I think that that's got to get elevated up. On top of that, it's accountable for all of us to understand data. I think that huge separation of, I do app dev, you do data, so I don't have to learn this. I think those days are gone. I think we've got to kind of bring all that together as a holistic solution and describe what the data is telling us and what that value is worth, because more often than not, we can see where there's more value. We just don't have the skills to articulate how to get our business to come over here and get it with us. So, and the longer you defer those conversations, I think the farther behind you're going to fall. Maybe that goes to the CIO CTO thing. I think CTOs are expected to kind of drive more of that product of here's where you should go, versus CIOs are more viewed kind of traditionally of execute my agenda. And I think that flip's got to step up quite a bit, because that's the expectation now. So what are you seeing, and how do you articulate that? And don't let someone else describe your story. If you did all that hard work, you should be the person to tell it. So don't feel like you got to hand that off to the next person. Work on your PowerPoint skills, work on your communication skills. But to Andy's point, put it into business acumen. You can do that. You didn't get into IT because you failed your business classes. I'm hoping that wasn't how that went. So, but I would say encourage you to speak up and, explain the why your team is doing what they're doing, not just the how component more often.
I stole this from somebody else and it stuck with me when I heard it, because it resonated with me. Absolutely. It's very, very important to consider. Numbers are very important, but facts tell, stories sell. So Julie mentioned that you tell your story. It's very important to have stories around the facts, because people remember stories. They don't necessarily remember concrete numbers, but they do remember stories, and they remember how they're told. It isn't so much what's said, although that's important, it's how it's said. So I think that's a very, very good call out, Julie. Okay, Joseph.
Hopefully you don't hear the neighbor mowing their lawn right now, but I apologize for that. I think for IT, we've become more business centric. I like to call my groups business technology as opposed to IT. And one of the funny little things that I've done is, if you think about Gartner's design, build, run model, I think the next gen version of IT is collaborate, integrate, orchestrate, which is what I call the new CIO. And when I think about collaboration with the viable options we now have in the cloud for data warehousing and business applications, I think it's incumbent on us as IT professionals to understand what's driving the business, which means what's driving customers. So collaborating with customers, partnering with key strategic vendors, and thinking about driving business value really becomes important on the collaborate side of that spectrum. And then in terms of integrating with all of the different disparity in cloud platforms and on-prem solutions, you've got to think through, as a business technology professional, how do you integrate all that stuff? How do you make it feel like it's one application or less than 10, let's say, or whatever number you've got. And then it's actually pulling the right information out of those solutions. So that's the integration part and the information part of the new CIO. And then the third component is orchestrate. Obviously, I think as business technology professionals, we've got to optimize the value of those solutions. If we've made an investment as a company in a platform, let's make sure that we're actually delivering on that value promise, monitoring the performance, making sure it's secure. So that's what I call next gen IT. And I think for me, in mid-market companies where I've been CIO, I've seen the skill sets change, because as you move from on-prem to platform as a service to software as a service or infrastructure as a service, your dependency on your own FTEs changes. You don't necessarily have to have an application specialist for a software as a service platform. You don't necessarily have to patch that software. We have to make sure that your partner is. So it's changing the way we think about IT. So I think the next 5 years, 10 years is going to be pretty exciting, and hopefully I'm still active and around on Think IT panels where we can talk about the evolution.
I love it, and that will be, Joe. I appreciate it. Okay, well, let's stick with you, Joe, then, on this next question. Harold K., I'm guessing that's Mr. Knutson. Speak of somebody that's been involved since day one with everything Think IT. Harold, thank you for your involvement and your support, and thank you for the questions. So for years, we've been drowning in data and starving for information. What have been your most successful techniques for changing that dialogue at your firms? So let's start with you, Joe, then.
I'll give you one example. In my last company, I was responsible for a software platform, and I mentioned we delivered a bunch of IoT, thousands and thousands of SKUs that had embedded firmware in them. We sold it's a B2B business, so we sold routers and switches and access points, outdoor TVs, everything you'd put in a a home automation platform, and we'd have our own firmware in them. They connected to our own cloud, and we gave those installers a mobile device. They could download the app on their mobile device, and say if that installer put a whole suite of solutions in for Mrs. Smith and her Apple TV froze. In the past, that installer would have to drive to Mrs. Smith's house and reset that device. We make a surge protector, many different SKUs, and we gave that integrator, we call them integrators, access to every one of those outlets through their smartphone. So when Mrs. Smith called up and said, hey, I'm trying to watch this or that, I'm trying to watch Downton Abbey, and I've got my friends over, and the thing froze up. Now they can jump on their phone, go to Mrs. Smith's house, virtually, of course, and then reset that outlet right from their phone. Which was great. That was game changing for our industry. But what we did is we said, look, we can detect when there's no activity on a port on a switch, and we said, what if we detect that, and what if we actually build some smarts into this platform, and we could take that data and reset that outlet proactively. So we started to use the data in that context, and all of a sudden we had self-healing platforms emerge. That whole thing really expanded and blew up, and several years ago it led to Snap AV getting sold to a new private equity firm because they love that technology platform. And so it really was game changing. It changed Snap AV from a manufacturer distributor to, in essence, a managed service provider. And it was really around that data and leveraging it for business value purposes.
That's a brilliant example. Thanks, Joe. Julie.
I think there's so many awesome examples of coming out around how we can use real-time data to change customer experiences. I think that everybody is expecting that we know everything right away. Like your example of they're watching Downton Abbey, something happens, we're able to fix it. Now the expectation is when I call you, I see you've been watching Downton Abbey, let me get that reset for you, right? So I think that bar continues to go up on consumers also expecting we know so much more about them. And I think what's also happening is we are more and more willing to share some of our personal data that's creating all of these really interesting use cases. 10 years ago, none of us would have put our personal where we live information out on the web. Now all of our kids have their Instagrams going, you know where they are at every moment. It's creating all this openness to know what you're doing that I think is going to drive such expectations and new use cases. I think with healthcare, COVID certainly is changing everything for us as well. So information maybe we would have been guarded on in the spirit of COVID, we're all more willing to share and participate in. I think that's also going to change what we're going to expect out of how we're going to manage our care in real time as well. So it's probably never been a more opportunistic time to understand and learn data. So I'm going to go back to if before you've separated those and thought you could have a wonderful career not understanding data, start digging in. I think understand how it's going to drive your apps, and really start thinking about the why you're chasing all of this and what use cases you can drive. So I'll just keep coming back to the why, I think, being the most critical thing that all of us should be empowered to ask and understand. And then I think that ties into having a better data management strategy, picking better technology, and coming up with creative solutions. So, and especially if you have someone that says you can't have that data, go through the 5 whys, right? Like push, like why? I think I'd be the most successful chief data officer if that was my only strategy. Just I'm going to do the 5 whys for 3 years. I'd win every contest.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that. And one of the themes of today's conversation is why. And for those of you that are not familiar with it, I highly recommend that you look up on YouTube the why, the golden circle, Simon Sinek, and he goes through an exercise of the why before the what and the how. Everything starts with why. And if you haven't seen that, it's a game changer for the way that, it changed my thinking completely when I was introduced to it a number of years ago. Highly recommend that you look up Simon Sinek, the golden circle, the why before the what and the how. So thank you for that. Andy.
I think I need to launch off the why to answer this question again and talk about a couple of things. The first is, really keep it simple. And I say that because, I think when in this environment where, you know, AI and ML is kind of the latest buzz phrase that gets thrown around, I challenge you to invite a vendor in for a marketing presentation and have them not mention that they have AI and ML solutions. And you know, I think if you kind of poke at what they actually mean and try and get down to the detail, you know, you'll hear a lot of explanations that sound very, very complex. And, you know, we're going to look at all the data in your company, and we're going to find the signal and the noise through all this data in your company. And, you know, conceptually, it's like, well, yeah, I guess I can see that making sense. But the reality is, you know, AI and ML is not hard to explain when you know what you're talking about. The concepts of, you know, what it is that you're expecting to achieve, and to come up with examples around, you know, how and why a solution might work is not actually hard to do. And the second part, kind of jumping off of that, is actually prove the hypothesis. Don't just make the hypothesis, prove the hypothesis. And I'll just give you some examples from, you know, from my industry in banking. You know, obviously, you know, we spend increasingly, you know, more dollars and time on fraud and fraud prevention, as we, particularly in this time, you know, where we've got customers that are using digital capabilities for the first time because they're not coming into our branches due to the COVID situation. You know, fraudsters are obviously seeing that as a huge opportunity. And so, you know, when we, you know, talk about some of the investments that we're making, we actually bring real life back-tested examples to say, when we know about the customer's device, when we know about the holistic nature of their behavior, when we know, you know, everything about the last time they logged in, how they logged in, how they actually navigate the app, are they you know, doing something that's out of pattern from what they normally do, and what does out of pattern mean in this environment? When you actually can back test and look at examples, and then talk about how investments and information and data can be used to well, ultimately improve customer experience. Because, you know, if you've ever been through a fraud issue with your bank, it's not that great of a customer experience, regardless of how well the bank handles it. So again, keep it simple and prove the hypothesis, I think, are two really important tools to actually getting you know, the clarity around that sort of turning data to information.
Thank you very much, Andy. All great information. Next question. Probably got time for one, maybe two more. Ramesh, thank you for your question. This is always an interesting one that comes up as well, because I don't think this is standard either. Who owns the data, business or IT? How has that changed over time? And I would add there, who should own the data? Let's start with you on this one, Julie.
Oh man, I think, why do I get the ones that are like CTO, CIO, like?
You get the fun ones to start with.
Yeah. So in certain cases, if that data asset is something that you have, I don't want to say productionalized, but you've commercialized, that you're actually selling, then I think there are certain cases where if it's tied to a P&L, you should have stronger business engagement in it. I think as far as also making sure that you've got good data stewards sitting in the business to understand who should be able to see what, it's helpful. I think honestly, for managing it, executing and running that playbook, I think IT is better situated to manage that agenda for an enterprise. You can have business owners doing approval on it, but I think our business teams just haven't been able to set up a good enterprise cross capability standard, so to speak. So I think IT is probably better positioned to be the operator, kind of guardian, steward, and call it owner most of the time across that data, with business kind of helping come in to make sure that the right people have the right access to it. So I just haven't seen, especially in large companies, businesses being coordinated enough to run a data kind of ownership strategy. They're just a little bit too fragmented on what they have. And I think IT's got other capabilities that we've done as an enterprise that we're better stewards of. So if I had to pick, I would say IT is going to have stronger ownership of the data in a lot of cases. But so I'm sure I could get argued the other way depending on how you're set up, but it's just a really hard thing to execute if you don't have it somehow centralized where everyone's on the same rules and standards. So, but I'll let maybe Aaron jump in too.
So the answer is it depends.
it does depend. Yeah, I hate to say it, but even if they're owning it from an access, I think the management of that data, right? So really understanding it, controlling it, making sure it has the right policies, you know, making sure it's on the right technology, being the steward of it and operationalizing it, I think is best successful if that sits in IT.
Andy, would you agree or disagree?
I will take the contrarian view.
I thought so, which is why I asked you. I read your mind.
But I'm probably going to answer the question a little differently because the context of ownership is really probably the kind of the sticking point for me, which is I think technology manages the data. I think though, when you think about data ownership from a data governance perspective, you know, it's got to be the business that really owns that data. And if you think about it just from the standpoint of data quality, just as an example, you know, as we think about, you know, as technology, we can measure data quality, we can report out on data quality. We have very little, you know, ability to impact data quality. And so on the, you know, when a business owns the data and they understand the value of quality data, you know, they've got much more ability to drive how data gets entered, drive the policies and procedures, drive the user stories that put stronger controls over how data comes into the organization. And the other part is just from the standpoint of provisioning and understanding, you know, particularly in our increasing environment from a regulatory perspective around data privacy. So as much as people might be willing to share more of their data, the restrictions and the requirements, whether it's, you know, HIPAA or PCI or you know, you name any of the other regulations, you know, it's important that we've got, you know, individuals that on the business that understand the data, that can ensure that it's being used appropriately and used within, you know, for the right reason. So again, probably a different way of answering the question. So that's really how I think about it.
Yeah, and let's just add, I think I took own as the management component. So I think I'm closer to Andy on that, right? I think to be successful for consistent management, hard to have the business pull that off. So go ahead.
I was trying to create some friction, but now you made us all kumbaya.
Let's do the next one. Whatever Andy says, I'm like, nope, never gonna work. That'll never work.
But I think the operative word there, or what we've got to look at is what does owning truly mean? What does it mean to own something? Because owning really ties to absolute accountability. And I think that's where it gets sticky with this particular question. Who is truly accountable? So I'll lay that up for you, Joe, to continue the conversation.
You know, I think, you know, the way I look at it is IT owns the operations, the care and feeding of the data, making sure that it's, you know, protected. And, you know, I think in some cases you might even think, you know, hey, especially if you're in a GDPR environment, you know, customers might say they own that data. You know, I almost feel like the question is not that relevant. It hasn't been that relevant to me throughout my career. I think if you just take a proactive and collaborative approach and you assume we all own it, you get a lot better results. As long as IT maintains that ownership responsibility from an operations standpoint. You know, I've never had a CFO who says I own the financial data, especially if there's a problem with it. It's always IT's problem. And unless the results are great, then of course the CFO takes credit for it. But I think, you know, it's almost an irrelevant question. I think, you know, in my experience, it's better to be collaborative and not worry about who owns what, and just do the right thing and make sure that if you're not getting the sort of response from your partners within the organization, that you reach out to them. My favorite phrase is no bitching, moaning, and whining. I borrowed that from Cy Wakeman. That's no BMW driving around who owns the data. Just go figure it out and make it happen.
I think that's a great way to finish the conversation. Just figure it out and make it happen and work collaboratively. Well, we're at time. I can't believe how fast this morning's session went. Great information by our esteemed panelists. Great to have you back, Joe. As always, Andy and Julie, really appreciate your involvement in giving back to the community. We haven't done this before, and everybody's on mute, so you won't be able to hear it, but I'd like for everybody to give the panelists a virtual round of applause. Thank you very, very much. Thanks again, everybody, for attending. Another great session this morning. It's Friday again already. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and although my father isn't on the call, happy birthday to my father today. Okay, thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Richard. Happy birthday to your father.
Thank you very much, mate.